a football squad is a group of people who are committed to literally goals, right? Achieving their goals, right? And we have to find ways to work together. Everybody on that pitch knows where their position is, where they need to play. And so that for me sums up how society works. So if society really does want to change, I'm not always convinced society is ready for change, if I'm honest with you, Layla. Nonetheless, we have to all play our role. We have to play our part. We have to show up. We have to be committed. We have to be dedicated. And we have to understand we're not always going to win.
Welcome to Third Culture Therapy, a podcast that looks at the unique ways our identity and cultural heritage impact our mental and emotional well-being. Today, we're honored to have Shaista Aziz, British-Pakistani writer, politician, stand-up comedian, and fearless advocate. As the co-founder of the Three Hijabis, she's tackling racism in football and challenging gendered Islamophobia head-on. With her sharp wit and powerful storytelling, Shaista sheds light on identity, activism, and the intersections of race, gender, and culture. This conversation promises to be thought-provoking, inspiring, and true to Shaista's style, brilliantly unfiltered. So I'm very excited to get stuck in. Welcome to the show, Shaista. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Layla. It's really an honor to be here. I'm a big fan of your podcast and your work. So thank you for having me on.
I'm a big fan of yours as well. And your work actually encompasses many spheres and fields. You wear many different hats. Which of those hats do you feel fits you the best? Another way of asking you, which of these many elements do you most closely identify with?
Wow, that's a really interesting question. So I see myself primarily as a storyteller, and the stories are told in lots of different mediums and different forms. So I'm, as you said, a British Pakistani. I come from a very rich tradition of storytelling, folklore, and all these things, and particularly for the women in my family. That span across the globe. The stories that I remember most are the ones I grew up with, and I grew up at a time when there wasn't a lot of resource in our family, and so women found ways to be able to have those conversations and to tell those stories. So I think that's what I am really. I'm a storyteller who finds multiple mediums to tell the stories.
One of those elements, and the one I want to dive into a bit more today, is football, right? And telling the stories through football. Why did you choose sports and football to tackle such a weighty topic like Islamophobia?
So I've always been a football fan, Layla, my whole life. And as a Muslim woman, a brown-skinned woman of color, I have not really felt safe watching football. In fact, I used to go and watch football without telling my family because I know that my mom in particular would have been really scared for me. She would have been scared for her boys as well. Um,
Mm,
she would have been more frightened for me because she knows that sadly football is very machoistic. And even though more women go to watch the game now and they play the game as well, thank goodness, there's not a lot of diversity there. So I am someone who's very stubborn in the sense that I believe I belong everywhere. And I have found a way to adopt that ethos. And so I'm not going to let anyone limit my life and, having joy. And for me, football brings joy. So I'm very aware that for many people who are not, white and male and all those things, it's still scary to go into a football stadium and to contemplate going to watch a game. But for me, football has always been about joy, and it's been about wonderment, and it's been about imagination, and seeing amazing goals being scored. And I've always been interested in the politics of football as well.
mhm,
So all those things combined led us to creating the Three Hijabis. We didn't want to create the Three Hijabis. We ended up creating it because there was a need. It was
mm,
basically a response to a horrific reaction, which was racism. After England got to the Euro finals at Wembley Stadium a couple of years ago, and they lost to penalties against the mighty Italy, and three young black players didn't score those penalties. And because of that, that was used as an excuse by racists and bigots to unleash an avalanche of racism. And so we called ourselves the Three Hijabis because the England men's football team is known as the Three Lions. And so we wanted to do like a riff on that. And I think that also captured a lot of people's imagination as well.
Take me back a little bit to your personal love of football. What is it, about the beautiful game as it's known, that you find particularly beautiful?
For me, football at its essence is about communities.
Mm,
I'm not naive. Football is a multi-billion pound industry. There is a lot of dark things that go on in that industry, and there's a lot of ill will towards people. There's a lack of protection of players and all those things. So there's got a really ugly side to the beautiful game as well, right? But at its
mhm,
heart, for me, football is it's like poetry to be
mm,
able to see players with the most incredible skills. And for me, one of my biggest heroes is Muhammad Ali, the late great Muhammad Ali. And I grew up with my parents telling me about him, and
mm,
all his politics, and he was an icon for everyone in my family. And for me, there's footballers, who kind of like resemble similar things for me. And so I've always been a big football fan. In fact, when I first went to watch a game, I remember being a bit alarmed and surprised at my own kind of vigorous enthusiasm. And I remember people looking around me going, oh, and I think I interpreted them looking at me as if to say, we thought she was a nice woman. And she's like shouting at me really rowdy. For me, football's always been about joy.
yeah,
But I also remember Hillsborough,
mm,
and I remember some, very dark moments that are entwined with football, including racism. So
yeah,
when we were growing up, we were told when England's men's team is playing, it's not safe for you to be outside. Don't go outside. And I guess there's a part of me, Layla, that's like I said, I'm stubborn, right? So there's a part of me that's like, well, actually, these streets and these neighborhoods and these communities are where I was raised and where I'm from. So why am I not going to be on the streets? If anybody shouldn't be on the streets. It's hooligans, it's racist, it's misogynist. So you can get off the streets, right? So there was a
mhm,
little part of me that was a kind of a bit rebellious about that. And I'll
yeah,
wrap up by telling this one really quick story, which I look back at and I think, oh my days. So in my early 20s, I went to watch a friendly between England and Brazil. There's no such thing as a friendly, really. But anyway, I went to watch England v Brazil at Wembley, and I decided to take the Brazil flag with me because, in my heart and mind, I believe that if you love football, you love Brazil. So I went
right.
there. I worked out very quickly. I went by myself. So I worked out very quickly that I will not be taking out the Brazil flag, right? So I left it in my bag because I'm not that daft. At half time, I took it out. And the looks I was getting, a very aggressive response, and I thought, oh. So I left to go and ask the steward if I could go and sit in the Brazil half, and he was like, absolutely not. I was like, I look vaguely Brazilian. He was like, no, go back. So I went back, and this is absolutely true. A Scottish man, I'm not quite sure why a Scottish man was watching England in the England section. Nonetheless, he said, "Leave the lassie alone. We're all Brazilian tonight," and he helped raise the flag.
No
And
way!
they all calmed down, and I was thinking, "Mate, I think you are more of an outsider here than I am with your Scottish accent." So again, these stories for me
Mm,
are part of the joy of watching
yeah.
the game.
Yeah, no, that's a really beautiful description of the essence of football, for many, and it's beautiful to hear how you describe it. So then it must have been really painful for you to see the barriers to entry for some, based on their race or their religion, and based on the reaction of a particular minority, albeit a loud and ultimately aggressive minority, blocking the ability to access that joy and that beauty. So explain to me what it is about the Three Hijabis that is countering that and how it's going about doing it.
I think at its essence, the Three Hijabis, we offer a different vision. We offer hope. We're not us alone, but the massive constituency of people. So we launched a petition the morning after the night before when England lost. at the finals of the Euros at Wembley. And within 24 hours, we received 1 million signatures. We were calling on the government and tech companies and football to ban racists from football. And the fact that that message was received so openly and warmly by so many different people was incredible. And I think that one of the reasons they received it is because people overwhelmingly, I think, are good. We're currently living, in times that are really grim. Every morning you wake up with a heavy heart. However, I do genuinely believe that if we evoke people's humanity, we remind them that actually, you know what, you are human and you need to show your humanity to everyone. I do believe 9 times out of 10 that is what happens. And so, what we offered is an alternative. We offered a real inclusive story, not the story of the hooliganism and the racism, which is part and parcel of daily life. And we're not trying to whitewash that. What we're also offering was an alternative story, a story of people who don't get hurt. So, three British Muslim women who happen to be hijab wearing women are standing there saying, "We're not having this. This is not happening. We're not having it," right? And more than 1 million people joined us to say, "Yeah, we're not having it either." And in fact, one of the first responses to our petition, Layla, was from a teacher who wrote to us on the petition and said, "Thank goodness for you three, because I'm going to school this morning and I feel absolutely devastated. I don't know how to explain to these kids that their heroes are being racially abused, in this day and age. Like, how do I explain that to them?" And now, instead, I'm going to focus their minds on this petition and focus their minds on what should be happening, which is a pushback, which is showing loud and unapologetic solidarity. The main message was really clear. We were like, football doesn't belong to the racists, it belongs to us, the football fans, and it belongs to all of us, and we're not having it.
Have you heard of the silk hair wrap company Paradise Fold? I've been using their 100% silk double-layered reversible wraps and turbans for years. And if you love your hair, I think you're really going to love these too. Beautifully designed, snug and luxurious, they're the ticket to hydrated, healthy, frizz-free hair. Third Culture Therapy podcast listeners get a special 10% discount on the Paradise Fold website with the code TCT10. And what's been the impact since you launched this campaign a few years ago?
Yeah, so football is a really tough beast in terms of trying to crack the culture. So initially, when we reached out to the Football Association, the FA, to ask to meet them, we were met with a lot of disrespect, it has to be said, and stonewalling. I think at that time, individuals who were working at the FA that we were in touch with, I think they thought, "Oh, these women, they'll go away." It's like, you don't really know us very well. The first response was stonewalling and disrespect, so we kept going, and then they started warming up to us, and in the meantime, we carried on doing our work. We were there to show them that we're not here to appease you, we're not here to, try and gloss over things. We're gonna be really clear about what we want to see change, and we're going to be respectful with you. We're going to If you invite us into your space, we will go, but we're not gonna sit there and make up the numbers, right? So, in the meantime, while we were working to get the asks of our petition implemented, we also joined forces with two other amazing feminist organizations. And we basically won in our campaign to get the Premier League to introduce mandatory sexual consent training across all of England's top flight clubs. So we worked with an organization called Level Up, and we also worked with an organization called End Violence Against Women. We've been looking at tackling gendered Islamophobia, particularly on the back of the race riots here in the UK last summer. So, our message is really clear. We want to use football as a vehicle for change, and we also want to make it really clear to those who run football, you have a responsibility. And we've been invited to Parliament to speak at government inquiries into toxic cultures in football, and we've done lots of media work. And I think for a lot of Muslims, particularly Muslim women watching us, they're like, "Wow, it's the first time we've seen hijabis talking about football." I'm like, "Yes, bring it on."
But the space of football and sports is a really interesting one because there's a little bit of a paradox in there. On the one hand, it can be a vehicle for change, as you said, and has elements of it that are very progressive. At least here, we've seen in the last few years with the increasing popularity and recognition of women's football, the Lionesses' victory, the way in which the Black Lives Matter movement became a bit part and parcel of certain players, at least appearances, and show acts of solidarity on the pitch by taking the knee, etc. However, you also have clearly still some very regressive, entrenched, problematic elements, as you mentioned, misogyny, racism, obviously, Islamophobia, and a sort of political whitewashing of, there are also it being used to kind of cover up or put a veneer on certain issues and people and parties and politics that really aren't actually doing much meaningful change.
Yeah.
How do you square that away? And what can we do about that if you do want to kind of maintain that purity of love and joy in sports and get the benefit of the community, as you say,
Yeah.
from it when you're facing these challenges?
Yeah, so I think football very much is a microcosm of society and what's happening out there. So we don't have a magic wand. We're not gonna change everything overnight. Our philosophy is that we're going to do our bit. So, I always say this, right? And sometimes people are like, "Oh, here she goes with their football puns," right? But a football squad is a group of people who are committed to literally goals, right? Achieving their goals, right? And we have to find ways to work together. Everybody on that pitch knows where their position is, where they need to play. And so that for me sums up how society works. So if society really does want to change, I'm not always convinced society is ready for change, if I'm honest with you, Layla. Nonetheless, we have to all play our role. We have to play our part. We have to literally play our part. We have to show up. We have to be committed. We have to be dedicated. And we have to understand we're not always going to win, right? In between winning, there's all that is where the work is. All that work goes towards winning, right? And so that's our approach to this, right? We know that football is really a tribal sport. We know that it is very much entwined with the identity, particularly of white working class people who overwhelmingly are vilified by politicians for being the problem. They're not the problem. Let's be clear about that. And we also know that politicians of all stripes try and use football to show that they're down with the people, that they get the working class, right? And it's like, oh, please, can you stop that nonsense as well? And I think increasingly, because of the way football's become more and more multi-billion pound dollar industry that is becoming more removed from football fans, more removed from working class communities and football fans are speaking up, and they are finding ways to try and support their local football teams. In some cases, try and buy their local football teams. Not with multi-million pounds of money, by the way, but they're doing crowdfunders and things like that. So I think there's also that pushback. And I think what we're seeing is exciting, particularly in the area of supporting refugees. So I was on the Football Association's refugee working group for a number of years. And I know that across this country, wonderful work is being done across football clubs where they are supporting refugees to flourish, to feel part of the community. And it's not talked about. And I think one of the reasons for that is because there's a fear of the backlash. There's a fear of how, football fans will respond. Well, they're not football fans. People who want to respond with racism and hatred are not football fans. They're using football as a vehicle to sprout that. At the same time, we can't sit here and say that football is a vehicle, that has the greater good at its heart, because it doesn't. It's a corporate beast, right? It's a multi-million pound industry, and there's a lot of things that go on the upper echelons of football that are not acceptable, and sports washing is definitely a thing, and I think, and the Three Hijabis think, that what we need to do is find those pockets of space where we can make change and work with others to create that change.
What would you like? What's your number one goal for the Three Hijabis? What would you like as a policy to be implemented tomorrow?
Well, we want our petition asks to be implemented. We want football to tackle racism. The
Mhm.
football players want racism tackled. More and more of them are being racially abused. They go to work and they're being racially abused. How horrific. So we want a racist ban from football. We want
Mhm.
football to take seriously the racialized abuse and all forms of abuse online. If you look at the fact that when very sadly the statistics haven't changed, whenever the England men's football team play, there is a big spike in domestic abuse, right?
Yeah.
So, we have to tackle that as a society. We also want the women's game to not mirror the men's game.
Mm.
So the England Lionesses are a phenomenal team. They're successful in ways the men's team haven't been. And if you look at the women's team, it's not very diverse. Most of the players there are white. The
Mm.
diversity that is present is LGBTQI diversity, which is
Mhm.
really important.
Yeah.
And we need to see the rest of diversity. We need to see representation. So there's lots of barriers there that need to be talked about and need to be discussed. And very recently, I went to Pakistan to go and research how to make football more equitable for Muslim women and girls. I received a Churchill Fellowship to travel to Pakistan. My two countries of focus are Pakistan, which has got the highest rates of gender based violence in the world. This has not changed in my mum's lifetime. She's a grandmother now with granddaughters. Record numbers of women are killed every year. And the other country is France, because France has the largest number of Muslims in Europe, and it bans women who choose to wear the headscarf from all forms of public life, and that includes playing football, playing any sport. Beyond it's beyond horrific that in 2025, um, so-called free Europe is doing this. And for me, it was really important also to turn the colonial gaze back onto France. And so when I went to Pakistan, the main things that I learned are that if we're serious about making football a game for everyone, then first thing is we have to be upfront about violence against women and girls across society. That's what happens in Pakistan. There's no denying this. People are very open about it. We have to create safety for girls and women to play the game.
Yeah, you really laid out a very interesting, complex picture there. Because one of the things that really struck me is that there are sort of multiple battlefronts, but one in which isn't perhaps really spotlighted enough is the tension that sometimes exists between Western liberal feminism and racism and Islamophobia. And you kind of articulated that when you're talking about, on the one hand, it's really great that we have this progress of women's football in the UK, but then if we're looking at it from a racialized lens or racial justice lens, it's failing massively
Yeah.
relative to the male counterparts.
Absolutely. And I think if we look at it from an equity perspective,
Mm,
if we look at it from a talent perspective, it's completely failing, right? So,
mm,
in Pakistan, there was no problem with a girl wearing shorts, wearing leggings, whatever she wanted to wear. If
mm,
girls want to wear hijab, they wear the hijab. If they don't want to, they don't wear the hijab, right? Safety has been created in those football spaces for them. There is no safety for women in Pakistan. The public space is very much a male
yeah,
dominated space, right? So it's
mm,
incredible. I had these young girls from some of the most marginalized and disadvantaged backgrounds. These are young people whose families alongside them are targeted by the likes of the Pakistan Taliban. We're
mm,
talking about, extreme violence that is, inflicted on these communities. And these girls were saying to me, how is it for you to be from England and to wear a hijab? Are you safe there? And I was like, wow, they'd seen all the images from the race riots. They'd heard about football players being denied access to the game because of their color and because of their, faith and all. They were very, very clued up. And
mm,
I really loved this because I thought, there is a perception in the West that, all Muslim women are, either there to be pitied or to be liberated, right? And it's like, no, thank you, And I always say this: I wish everybody would stay out of Muslim women's wardrobes, including Muslim men who want to
Mhm.
tell us what to wear. And I always am very clear about this, right? If you choose to wear a hijab, that's your right as a woman. If you choose not to wear it, that's your right as a woman. And to force a woman to wear something she doesn't want to wear is hateful and misogynistic. And to force her to remove something she wants to wear is hateful and misogynistic. It is not rocket science, right? You know, and one of the messages that's coming through from the FA is that the UK has the rising number of mixed race people. I mean, in my own family, two generations on, I've got multiple numbers of nieces and nephews who are mixed race. Long may that
Mhm.
continue, right? Um, the point is, the FA is saying if we don't capture this talent, they're going to go
Mm.
and play for other countries. And at the end of the day, there is a business dynamic to this as well, right? So we can sit here and say, we need this for an ethical, and more equitable society, which we do. But we also need it, they need it for other reasons too, right? And
Yeah.
for me, this is about lifting people's imaginations and
Mm.
dreaming big, and dreaming far in a vast way, and knowing that it's not true to say you can be anybody, because that's not how the world works, right? However, you can go and enjoy a game. You can participate in the game. Not everyone's going to be a footballer. You can go and be involved in sport in different ways. And so I think it's about, it really winds me up when I hear hard to reach communities. I'm like, reach. First of all, don't go reaching anyone without their consent, right? You don't wanna be reached, okay? Secondly, if you're just there to extract,
Yeah.
who wants to reach you? Go away, right? And this
Mhm.
this is what Pakistan showed really clearly, that all
Yeah.
these kind of like tropes that are out there. Oh, their communities don't want them to play. Oh, these girls are not allowed to play. Absolute nonsense. No one is saying that there are not barriers and challenges. No one's saying that. However, these tropes are so boring and
Mhm.
so out of date. And so, I think the women's game has an opportunity to really become bigger and bolder and more equitable. And I really hope they take those challenges on board.
Hey, are you enjoying this episode? Well, let us know. In fact, better yet, let others know by sharing the show with them. Follow Third Culture Therapy Pod on Instagram, YouTube, and Substack, and listen to the show on all the usual channels. Now, where were we? All of your work has come about because you rightly identified the problem, i.e., Islamophobia and racism. But what we haven't spoken about in detail is the impact of that
Yeah.
on daily life, on you, on your family, on your community, on footballers, on fans,
Mm.
the actual impact. What is that? What has it been for you? Because you talk and you it's lovely, like very positively and very empowered, and I'm sure that is very much you. But this problem exists, and no doubt it would have impacted you on a personal level.
Absolutely, Layla. I mean, how could it not? And as you asked me that question, I started feeling heat rising up in my body. And I took a deep breath and really grounded myself, right? So, my positivity isn't a performance. And I know you know that, right? It's not a performance, it is who I am. Okay. And I feel incredibly blessed that I'm an optimistic person.
Mm.
Because I'm someone who has a lot of vision, and I'm a dreamer and I dream big. And so for me, art and culture and sport has, in particular, has really helped me to stay grounded in my
Yeah.
body and in my humanity, when everything around me is the opposite of that, is telling me to do the opposite of that, right? And also, I have a complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which I was diagnosed with after I got long COVID. And so basically, that has also enabled me to understand myself better.
Mm.
And I am not someone who subscribes to toxic positivity. I think toxic positivity is a killer. I really do, right? So To answer your question, the impact is deep, and I can't measure it because I'm only really understanding it now. I've been peeling back an onion, right? And as I'm peeling it back, I'm seeing more and more and more. And generational trauma is very real. So it's not only my trauma, it's generational trauma. I'm the proud granddaughter of colonized subjects, right? And this goes way back, right? And every time I go back to Pakistan in particular, my family are in other parts of the world as well, but when I go back to Pakistan, I can see it, I can feel it in the earth, in the soil, and every day I'm learning more and more about it. But at its essence, it's about not feeling safe. It's about knowing that anything can happen to you at any time. Violence is it's a blink of an eye away. So when we created the Three Hijabis, I was asked to write a piece for the Guardian about my love of football, and I told a story which I'll just take a minute to tell you very quickly. After my dad passed away, Allah yarhamu, of cancer a number of years ago now, and he was a very big influence on my life. Me and my mom went traveling, and we ended up in Italy. And I said to my mom, "Would you like to go to Milan, mom, or would you like to go to Rome?" And I didn't know my mom was such a fashionista. She said, "Let's go to Milan." So on the train, I was secretly hoping she was going to say that. Anyway, we got on the train, went to Milan, and I was like, right, I need to go to the San Siro Stadium because when I was growing up, I used to watch a lot of Italian football, and we grew up on Italian football. Me and my two brothers. One of my brothers is a big football fan; the other one's not bothered. Anyway, we got to the San Siro. I was giddy with excitement. Okay, that this is a mighty San Siro, and there was graffiti on the pillars about the players from back in the day, the great players. I was very excited. We saw Maradona's boot. My mom was very excited about that. On the way out of there, we were crossing the road, a pedestrian crossing, and a man looked out of the car, glared at me with real aggressive intent, revved up his engine. He wanted me to think he's going to run me over, right? And then he did a Nazi salute. And I was like, "Whoa." So I quickly literally had to, like, shove my mum out of the way, and when we got to the hotel, very nice, lovely hotelier, I was really shocked, and I said to the guy, "This is what happened." And he was like, "What did you expect, madam?" And I was like, "What?" And he said, very sadly, "This is the state of this country, and this is the state of Europe." And I was like, "I've been to a place which is a childhood dream to go to, and this is what's happened to me." And he was sympathetic, but he was saying to me, "Yeah, this is what's going on." And so in this piece, I wrote about how, you know, we know, people of color know that in a blink of an eye, we can become, we can go from being relatively safe to being in extreme danger. And that for me really summed it up. And when I was growing up here in England, right, I was always told, be careful as a woman, be careful as a girl. When you come home late from school, have your keys in your hands,
Mhm.
ready to push back. As I've got older, it is my hijab and my Muslim identity that is the trigger for this
Yeah.
hatred. And being a woman is definitely a trigger as well. I would
Mhm.
say it goes Muslim, brown, and then a woman, right? In the tier, okay? So I have been subjected to more violence in the last 10 years, physical violence on the streets, than I ever have when I was growing up as a child. And when I was growing up as a child, my parents were subjected to this violence, this racist violence. My dad, was attacked with a knife. I remember waking up one morning, waking up in the middle of the night, finding my mum washing his shirt in the sink, and it was full of blood. And then I thought I'd imagined this. So I asked my mum, I said, I have this image that keeps flashing back. Where's it coming from? And she was really shocked. She was like, "You remember that?" I was like, "Yeah, I do remember that." So she told me. And also, I remember very vividly as a kid being terrified. I think I must have been about 7, because the then British National Party, a
Mhm.
racist entity of a political party, put an announcement out that they would go and burn down the houses of anyone, any, they didn't use this language, but any black people, any people of color, they used derogatory language for us, racist language. If they saw us looking out the window, they'd burn the house down. So my cousins came to spend the entire day with us. my parents took the day off work and my auntie and uncle went to work. They had to have a conversation about how they were going to manage this. And this is some of my earliest childhood memories. And
Gosh.
I'm sad to say that I feel very devastated that my nieces and nephews now are from a different generation, and they don't face necessarily the same type of violent racism. What they're facing more is deep entrenched Islamophobia in a way that I wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think the tragedy is that a lot of people, particularly liberals, do do not believe Islamophobia exists. Well, it does exist, right? They say Muslims are not a race, therefore Islamophobia is a load of nonsense. And we say Muslims are pathologized as a race, regardless of whether you wear clothing that identifies you as being a Muslim. I'm becoming more aware
Mm,
myself of how all of this has impacted me
yeah.
through therapy,
Mm,
through somatic healing. You know, I'm a qualified therapeutic counselor myself. I've been
mm,
on the journey of doing the training. I have learned so many things about myself that I did not know about, right? And
yeah.
it's been really at times overwhelming. However, I feel like it's the first time in my life where I'm actually now breathing properly.
Mm,
Prior to this, I hadn't been breathing properly, and I didn't know that, and I didn't understand that. And then when I did start knowing it and understanding it, I was like, wow. And so, you know, I think it's really deep.
yeah.
And sadly, people think racism is about an individual incident against an individual. No, racism is a system, and I think that in England, I won't say the entire UK, but in England in particular, there is a daily denying of racism and a daily gaslighting.
Yeah.
And the last 16 months of the genocide in Gaza has totally brought this home in a way that I think nothing else has ever done before.
100%.
And so many people I know who have never really lived their lives through the lens of being racialized because it's not that they don't think racism exists, they just think that they're far removed from it.
Mhm.
Um,
I put my hand up and say I was one of those.
yeah. So, you know,
Because because I could get away with it, so to speak, because, I'm passing. I can pass for anything other than in fact, I never get, the guess, of where are you from? If I ever throw, what do you think? It's never anywhere from the Middle East. It's never any Muslim country. It's always Brazil, Portugal, Spain. I don't know what, this, that, the other. Because I'm not outwardly presenting as Muslim, because I speak, my English is my native tongue, because many things, and because I can speak the lingo, right? Basically, passing.
yeah, yeah,
So I never, so I was, it's not that I didn't think it existed. I knew it existed, but I was like, it exists for a particular type of person, you know?
yeah.
And you're absolutely right,
And there's
that
a-
in the last year
yeah,
and a half, it has really come to slap me across the face in ways that I'm still very much dealing with. Because as you say, it's very, very deep. It's very deep. And all of these conversations that I have on mental health at the beginning and the end of it, they start and end in the same place, which is like people's quests for belonging and community and safety, right? And when intellectually, somatically, emotionally, regardless of what your direct experience has, that these elements are not available to you, that's very painful.
yeah, it is. It is very painful, and I'm also really struck by everything you've just shared there as well, because that's not easy to deal with at all. And I think that whole white passing thing or the passing thing, it I imagine it's even more disorientating. If it, you know, and I think some of this is also about the way we, as racial, all people are racialized. White people are racialized. They are racialized in very different ways to us, right?
Mm,
I think the level of internalized racism and the internalized Islamophobia. So I'm proudly come from a working class Pakistani family. When I go to Pakistan, my class status kind of shifts very dramatically. It goes
mm,
upwards, as does my, having a foreign passport. You know, I live a totally different life there than most people, right? And the level of real like venomous kind of Islamophobia and,
Mm,
like, hatred of diaspora Pakistanis. I'm like, "Wow." And it's only when some of my friends left Pakistan and went to study in Canada or America where they're on the phone to me going, "Oh my days." I'm like, "Listen, dudes, your degrees from these Ivy League universities do not protect you from anything. And
yeah.
you are looking down on your own people," right? Thinking that, we're the working class, like, kind of people who just don't want to integrate. And all
Mm,
those stories, you see, again, we go back to stories. The stories are told about us, the
mm,
stories that we then tell about ourselves, and the
mhm.
stories that we tell each other to separate each other from each other, right? So it is very painful. And however, I will really say this, not because I'm trying to be optimistic, there is deep power in community,
Yeah.
and Gaza in particular has brought people together. Being in community is extremely important as well. And I think there's a lot of collective grief. And,
Yeah.
that's how grief is supposed to be. Grief is supposed to be collective. It's not supposed to be about individuals kind of,
Mhm.
lurking in a corner, sobbing their heart out, and then, coming back to the desk pretending they're okay. That's not what grief is. Grief, we come from rich histories and lineage where grief has been about everyone, right?
Yep.
And so I'm really exploring what grief means for me, because
Mm,
the grief that has been sat in my bones has, over since the genocide started, I have been howling. And my
yeah.
mum said to me, "You didn't even cry like this when your dad passed away." I was like, "No," because my dad died peacefully with his family around him.
Mm,
What we're seeing is unseeable, right? And
mm,
so I'm really aware of this grief, and some days it really floors me, and I've learned how to deal with that. How to deal with it is to accept it
mm.
and to go out in nature, go out, for me at least, go out and, connect with myself and ground myself back in my body, right?
It's really so well put. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's really very deep, and like I really feel like it it kind of entered my heart probably in a moment that I really needed to also hear it. I also lost my father many years ago to cancer, and it wasn't a linear experience the way I grieved him, and it's not a linear experience the way I'm grieving now. There are these weeks and days where I'm like, great, I get it. I know what I'm doing. I know where I can help and believing in a higher power, having faith, all of this. And then there are days where I'm like, I'm fed up.
Yeah,
I don't want to anymore.
yeah.
I'm like, white flag,
I'm
show me the
angry.
nearest cave. I'm going in. I'm not coming out. It's really, and it's very tough. And I also want to admit that, you were talking about internalized racism and Islamophobia. And I've got to admit, this past year and a half really brought home to me that I have internalized Islamophobia. And that's also something that I've been having to grapple with at the same time that I was railing against this injustice that I'm seeing. I was like, wait a minute for a second. You know what? Now you're getting to see a little bit where your own thinking was warped.
Yeah, and
Um,
how could you not internalize racism if you live and
yeah.
breathe, which we are, right? And you live in the West in particular, everything out there, all the messages, the bombardment of the images, the gaslighting in particular about the genocide in Gaza, the false narrative, the the denial of the truth, the stories, our stories, all our stories, our collective stories. It's impossible to be able to withstand that. It really is. So I think the other thing is, alongside the deep grief, is compassion. To
Yeah.
have to find ways to for all of us to cultivate this compassion for ourselves and for everyone, right? Now,
Mm,
before I started really understanding the complexities of trauma, I would feel far more agitated when people would say ignorant and ridiculous things to me. I'd
mm,
really, I'd be like, "Oh," and I don't
yeah.
feel like that anymore. Not because I'm some hippie. I love the hippies, by the way. Not because I'm some wonderful human being. Absolutely not. It's because I have learned that that is not my role. That's not my job. If you by denying someone's humanity, you're really showing that you have a lack of humanity. It's not my job to fix that.
Yeah.
In the space where I have a lot of space, which I work in, I will show up there and I will counter that, okay, as much as I can and as much as I'm capable of. I also know now about capacity. I don't
Mm,
have capacity on a daily basis to deal with trash behaviors and trash attitudes and racism and anti-Arab racism and it's Palestinian racism. I don't have time for that, right? And
mhm,
I also have learned so much, particularly from my Palestinian friends during this time. The way they have held themselves together. I know they're not holding themselves together on some days, right? And it's been an absolute honor to spend time with them, to be in community with them in particular, and to be in community with everyone else, and it's taught me so much. And again, I go back to the collective grief,
yeah.
because when we're on the streets with the flags and we're marching, we're also in collective grief.
Yeah.
Collective grief is love. It's a love language. That's what
Mhm,
I think, right?
mhm.
It's humanity. It's like showing up and saying we're still here, and seeing all those people walking for miles to get home. It's like the most profound thing I've ever seen. I used to be an international aid worker. I have traveled the world. I have seen people at their best and their worst and their most vulnerable. I have been, blessed to be a witness to this. And I have never seen anything like that, right? And the dignity and the courage. And by the way, I don't espouse to thinking Palestinians are superheroes, because no, they're not. You you know, how to be able to survive that doesn't make you a superhero. It makes you a really extraordinary human being, in my opinion. And
Yeah.
every time you watch a video or you watch something, the way people have held each other together in
Mm.
those, new refugee camps that have been created. Faith, and here in the West, people are scared to talk about faith. It's a taboo subject, right?
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
say to me, "You seem to be very strong. How are you so strong?" And I'm thinking, "Take a guess," right?
Yeah.
And they don't want to go there. There's a fear.
Yeah.
And I don't subscribe to religiosity, by the way. Religiosity to
Mhm.
me is a very big red flag. Okay. Spirituality is what I think being a human is about.
Mm.
But people are scared of that. And I think the whole wellness and the mental health areas, which we both work in, I think there's fear about talking about these issues there as well.
Yes, there is. There's
And
a
I
lot of
think,
fear.
yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's really unacceptable.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. It's very limiting, and I mean, it's been a learning, like I said, for me as well, going into wellness and from different avenues. But like now in hindsight, I look at how, it was very individualistic to begin with. And fair enough, maybe at a certain point that was needed, but not. And ultimately, why did I kept, keep going back was because it wasn't actually entirely fulfilling just working on things myself. It wasn't culturally relevant. I did still feel like there were elements of me in my background that had to be put on a shelf. And yes, I was also part and parcel of the, Western minded wellness take, which is both looking at the individual, but secondly, removed from faith and religion. Religion has been much maligned, and there is reason for that, understandably. But I think where it becomes really problematic is again this focus on particular, like very cherry picking of either circumstances, situations, or people, and making that about a large, billion plus subscribing to religion. Um, that's the problem, and that's where a natural reaction may be this complete shunning and aversion to it. But really, ultimately, and this is again, still learning, figuring that out myself, is kind of only harming myself in that process
Yeah,
because I have, regardless of where I stand on it now, this is a part of my history. And if I'm not at least looking at it and reconciling myself with it, then I've just completely cut myself off from it, from these roots, I'm not going to find long-lasting nourishment.
Mm.
This is just also what it's come, it's all part of the learning, I guess, which is, what you're also
Yeah. And
expressing.
again, thank you for sharing that with me because I fully agree with you. I think, you know, being a child born and raised in the West, being a third culture kid like you, we have to relearn everything. And we're lucky enough to be able to do that. So I think it's really important to be curious
Mm,
about what we think we know
yeah.
and what we don't know, right?
Mm,
And
mhm,
what you've said is spot on, right? Religion has been used and abused over hundreds and hundreds of years to create all sorts of war and havoc and mayhem and disaster and all of that, right? And that we don't deny that. Multiple things can be true at the same time. I think it's really the onus is on all of us to go on the journey
yeah.
and it's a lifelong journey, right? To go get on the journey, stay on it,
Yeah.
to go and work out, well, what is this about actually? What is this really about?
Yeah.
But I've been extremely deeply moved. Like I said, I've been still I'm in grief and I'm moved and I'm
Mm,
humbled and I'm in awe of everything that has happened in the last sort of 16 months, particularly as I said with Gaza, that's the reference there. And it's
yeah.
changed me forever. And I know that it's changed pretty much everyone I know who's
Yeah.
chosen to talk to me about it. And I think what it's done is made a lot of people question everything.
Yeah.
Like question, well, we know there's racism, or we know there's Islamophobia. However, we didn't know it was this deep and this extreme. And
Yeah.
we thought, the human rights was a pillar of Western society. Well, it's not. And I think the key here is, it for me, this is not about being so sad that I can't move. I
Yeah.
can't literally get up in the morning, right?
Mhm,
It's about knowing that this is what I'm dealing with.
yeah.
And I'm not dealing with this by myself. I'm dealing with it with all the decent minded people in the world. And there
Mhm,
are plenty of them. Don't hide from the world.
yeah.
We don't know the impact that we have on each other. We all have impact on each other. We all need contact with each other. All of us, every human being, right? And if we shy away and hide away because we think the world hates us, the world doesn't hate any one of us, right? These people in power create these dynamics, okay? We are missing out on all this love and all this humanity and all this connection, right?
It's been an absolute honor spending this hour talking to you and learning from you. And thank you so much for your wisdom and your kindness and your grace, but more than anything, for taking up the space and for showing others that it is not only possible, but it is necessary. And it's very much our right to inhabit the space and to try and be more and more the voices and the spaces that we would like to hear and see. So thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Layla. I'm totally anti-occupation. The only occupation I agree with is occupying our space. We belong everywhere, and we have the right to be everywhere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Cheers to that. Thanks, Shaista.
Thank you, Layla.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Third Culture Therapy. We'd love to hear from you, so get in touch with us via Instagram or leave comments on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you are listening. And please do like, follow, and share.